U.S. strikes killed an al-Qaeda-affiliated operative in Syria on Saturday, who the Pentagon says had direct ties to the ISIS terrorist responsible for killing 2 U.S. service members last month. Meanwhile, President Trump and Ayatollah Ali Khamenei publicly sparring this weekend, with the president saying it's time to look for new leadership in Iran. For more on tensions in the Middle East, let's bring in Fox News contributor General Jack Keane. General, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Delighted to be here.
Happy to have you. So the president said this week that the Iranian regime canceled planned executions of protesters. He dialed back some public statements about the possibility of U.S. military intervention amid these reports we were seeing about concern from Israel and Arab states about potential Iranian retaliation. But the president just this past summer sent B-52 bombers to obliterate Iran's nuclear facilities just 30 hours after letting the world believe that he was going to give a 2-week window for any action. And this week, when Iranian state media broadcast an apparent threat to the president's life, the White House was suspiciously silent on it. Listen to this. It was images of the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, according to reports, with the message, "This time it will not go wrong."
I have not seen that, to be honest with you, Jackie. We'll take a look, and I'll let the president and his national security team examine that footage to ensure its legitimacy. Again, I haven't seen it, so I can't comment on it.
Do you think the White House really hadn't seen that threat, or were they maybe just letting Iran believe that the president might not take any action soon?
No, I think the president's been pretty clear here. He intends to hold the Iranian regime accountable to what they're doing to their own people. And I would take him at his word, and certainly the regime should take him at his word. They've completely disregarded it, obviously. The minimum number of casualties inflicted in terms of people killed now is somewhere around 5,000. Other estimates are even greater than that, over 20,000 imprisoned for sure. And any thought that they will not kill those who are in prison, all we have to do is go back to the summer. They arrested over 22,000 people after the 12-day war in June. And they hung over 1,500 of them in public displays on the ends of cranes, which was stranglized a person who was being hung like that. And they do that to intimidate the population. There is no doubt that this bloodbath has not ended. And what is actually happening on the ground now, they have brought in Iraqi militia, reported Pakistani and also Afghani militia, in addition to the IRGC, to the Bajaj militia, which they own, to patrol the streets, loudspeakers, and people with machine guns on the corners, making certain that nobody comes out of their residence. If they do, they're going to be shot, and they have shot them. There's only been 2 demonstrations in the last 48 hours, comparable to 200-plus demonstrations being conducted simultaneously until the bloodbath has begun. I believe the president at his word. He intends to hold the regime accountable for what they have done. And I believe, well, why hasn't it happened? Well, I think the reason is also pretty obvious. We are moving assets into the region. And I think it's likely that when the president looks at his military teams, looks at it, you don't just look at the targets that you want to take down in terms of leadership, IRGC, the militias themselves, exporting distribution points for oil, etc. There's plenty of targets. But you also have to consider, Jackie, what is Iran going to do in retaliation? Because they have normally retaliated. Mm-hmm. How do we protect our bases? And what about Israel? Are they going to attack Israel? The reality is likely attack Israel. So we have entered into discussions with Israel, certainly. What does that mean for them? And what likely it means, I'm just speculating, is we expanded the targets to ballistic missiles, which would do damage to us as well as to the Israelis. Make certain that we have all the assets in the region to be able to accomplish that. So anybody's thought here that President Trump has walking away from the red line, he doesn't use that term, but from the threat that he issued to the regime and the ultimatum, I'm going to hold you accountable if you go after and hurt and kill the Iranian people. Mm-hmm. That threat is still on the table, and I would take him at his word.
We've got about a minute left, but I want to get your take on Greenland. When the president imposed tariffs on 8 NATO allies yesterday in response to those countries deploying their militaries symbolically to the island amid his pursuit to take Greenland one way or another, there's this delegation of Democratic and Republican lawmakers in Greenland linking arms with the hands-off Greenland protesters, saying that the president's position is being challenged back home. And here's what one member said this week.
The president is talking about spending $700 billion. That's the estimate for Greenland. They're talking about purchasing Greenland. For somebody who considers himself a deal maker, that's a really bad deal for something we can get for nothing.
So that's Democrat Senator Jeanne Shaheen, but we've heard similar sentiments from Republicans, too. I want to ask you, why does the U.S. have to own Greenland when you've already got the access there? There's a treaty that would allow the U.S. to expand its military presence pretty much however the president wants, and you've got Denmark welcoming that.
Well, first of all, I mean, multiple presidents over a couple of centuries have looked at Greenland, obviously, as an asset that certainly would be in the United States' vital national interest, largely because of its location. Certainly from China and Russia, which are real threats to us now. Russia had been a threat for a long time. So I think it's always been an aspirational goal and a desirable goal to own it. I understand that. But this is an independent, sovereign country tied to the control of Denmark, which also is an independent, sovereign country and a member of NATO. And I don't think taking it by force is something we're really going to do. I believe that is leverage and negotiation. Listen, the president is somewhat unorthodox in how he goes about making deals, and we've all seen it in the first administration and the second administration. And he uses rhetoric to gain leverage here. Okay. I really think at the end of the day, with some creativity and imagination, we can work an economic and a security deal that will benefit the United States, Greenland, and also Denmark. I do think we can get there, and negotiations have begun, and that's a good thing.
All right, General Jack Keane, always great to talk to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great talking to you, Jackie. Thank you.
You as well, General.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.